Checklist number 1 consisted of counting to 10 from various starting points. So having a child start from 3 and counting to 10, or starting from 6, counting to 10. Sort various household items by color. So just walking around the house and saying, this is a blue shirt, this is a blue shirt, this is a blue shirt. So by being able to group things together by color, and then using pennies to count up to 5. So parents were able to pick 2 to 3 activities to do every night with their student to be able to prepare for the next day's class. With week 2, in the checklist, again, I added a little bit more onto the students, but I also increased counting numbers. So instead of counting up to 10, the students were able to count up to 15, again, starting by various different points, whether it be 7 or whether it be 11, and counting up to 15. Now, students were to go around the house and sort things by various shapes. They were able to use pennies to count up to 10, using pennies count from various starting points, just like the first task, to up to 10. So giving students and saying, hey, count 4 pennies. So students would be able to count out 4 pennies and then watch the video. So every night, parents were supposed to be doing 2 to 3 of these activities. And then with week 3, the checklist consisted of something very, very similar to the first 2 weeks, except now students were counting up to 20 with numbers. They were sorting items by color and shape. They were using pennies to count up to 15, starting at different various points with counting up to 15 with the pennies, and then watching a different video. So with the checklist tracker, as you can see, I had about half of my students turn in the first week, and then it started to increase as we went along. So week 2, I had one more student turn in their weekly checklist, and then by week 3, I actually had all the students turn in their checklist. And this was huge because finally, as you can tell, Chris didn't turn in week 1 or week 2, finally turned in week 3, and this was because he was, as he said, that he was tired of doing all the extra work in class, which was just the work that he had missed at home. So small group work activities, observations, recording. There's 2 videos here that will lead you to YouTube if you would like to go watch them. And this is working with 2 of my students, Braden and Chris, with some counting and colors and sorting of shapes. So my data analysis. So the standardized test data analysis, as you can tell, I have the pre and post. The pre is in the blue and the post assessment is in the green. As you can tell, I had a lot of growth throughout. There are still some struggling students, but not any digression or decrease in the scores from the pre-assessment. I actually aligned the questions with the standards as well. This way I could go back and look at and say, okay, well, question 4, there's only 2 more students from pre to post assessment that understood the question. Did I word the question weirdly, or could I have done it differently, or is there some way that I missed it by not doing a certain activity? So by looking at like question 4, question 7, and question 6, I can go back and look at those activities that I did with the students or had them do in class, and now I can go back and say, okay, well, where do I need to go from here? How can I help to increase the scores for these questions as well? So the checklist turn-in data overall, I think I had a very good turnout. The max was 3 checklists to turn in. As you can see here, the least amount of check-ins turned in was 1, and 2 students turned in all 3. So my research findings, the basics. So the class was 5 times a week, 45 to 60 minutes for each session. There were 6 participants. The checklist for tasks to completed was 2 to 3 tasks at home every night. There were check for understandings daily at the beginning of class, quick assessments aligned with the checklist, and then hands-on activities for those who completed the checklist and did well on the check for understandings. Small group or one-on-one sessions for the teacher for the students with the teacher if they did not do well on the check for understandings or completed the checklist. So in order to move on to the hands-on activities, students had to be able to pass the check for understandings because those were aligned with the checklist. And then for those who did turn in the checklist, they were able to do more hands-on activities, whereas the students who did not turn in checklists had to then go back and do those, as Chris would say, the extra work in class in order to be able to try and move on to the hands-on activities. So the facts. Here we see that 50% of the students turned in at least 2 checklists. 33% turned in 3 checklists, and then 17% of the students turned in only 1 checklist. So here I have the pre and post thoughts towards a flipped classroom. 47% of the students were interested beforehand with a flipped classroom, and towards the end, I had 83% of students who were interested in a flipped classroom. Again, going back to the pre-thoughts, there were 53% of students who were unsure or not interested in participating in a flipped classroom because they thought it was going to be very overwhelming, too much work. And then when you go to the post thoughts towards a flipped classroom, there was 17% who did not know if they were interested. And this was because he had not turned in the first 2 weeks checklist, which meant that he had to do what he thought was more work during class. And he grew from not interested to he didn't know if he was interested or not. I think with more time, I think he would have switched over to being more interested in participating in a flipped classroom. So facts continued. 83% of students turned in 2 or more checklists. Incomplete or missing checklists did not count as completed, and majority of students who were missing 1 checklist did so at the beginning of the study. 17% only turned in 1 checklist, and he turned in the very, very last checklist because he did not like doing all the extra work in class, as I already stated. 47% were excited to participate in a flipped classroom at the beginning, and then by the time we were done, 83% were excited to be a part of the study of the flipped classroom. There was 25 to a 50% increase of standardized test assessment scores. So that means when looking at this, students grew anywhere from the 25 to 50% range. So that is a huge percentage of growth for individual students. So conclusion, there are some positives. Increase of student growth. So on the online surveys, the checklist, the standardized test and parent contact, there was a lot of student growth in each of those. So, it went from the small percentage who were excited to participate in a flipped classroom versus by the end of it, there was a lot of students who were excited and willing to participate in the flipped classroom. Checklist grew throughout. The percentage of students who turned it in from the beginning to the end was a huge difference. Same thing with standardized tests, 25 to 50% increase on standardized test scores, and parent contact throughout the study was very important. There was a lot of increase in participation. It can be implemented in all subjects in any schools. Just teachers have to be prepared and willing to put forth that extra effort to be prepared. There are some needs, more time allotted for this study. I need more participants and more planning time to be able to have those activities where when I go back and look at the certain questions that were a little bit further behind or a little bit students were still struggling with, I need more time to plan for activities and tasks for the kids to do at home and in classroom to help increase the scores for those questions. So the significance of the findings. Students are responsible for their learning. There's a greater increase of participation during class. There's a deeper understanding of the skills and content, more engaging, more hands-on, more time to explore the students' questions and to be able to support their needs at the same time. Able to work one-on-one or more in a small group setting for the students who may be struggling or for the students who did not complete their checklist at home. There's more chances to progress fast for faster learners. And it creates a diverse and differentiated classroom setting. And so I'm able to reach all the students at their level. Homework, instead of being homework, is now a preparation for an in-depth focus on skills. So recommendations for this study. First would be the length of time, anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And I know that's a very long time for a research project, but that allows for more students to participate in the flipped classroom. It allows to see what works and what does not work. It helps to fully develop more activities for students and parents that they can do at home, more input from parents and students, and more feedback on the surveys. The next thing that I would do would be able to create a cheat sheet, so a website list for parents and students, more websites that are more kid-friendly, that have less sign-ins and passwords, that have more educational games and videos for the students to play at school and at home. So I'd be able to create a cheat sheet that I could adapt throughout time to meet the needs of all my students, but be able to be actively engaged in learning while at home or at school. And then my new direction for my study would be older students, so anywhere from 3rd to 5th grade. That way I could have written responses on the surveys and they could give their honest feedback instead of just a multiple choice for this survey. I would also have parents take the survey. That way I could see the increase or decrease or where parents are with their involvement in their students' lives with the older students. And then I would want to also look at, could a flipped classroom influence behavior in the classroom? Could it create a more positive learning environment for all students? Could it help eliminate some of the behaviors where students are disruptive or off task because they're bored or they're not attentive enough to be able to pay attention to the lectures in class? So could a flipped classroom influence behavior? And that is my study. Thank you for listening, and thank you for going through my PowerPoint.